As the war on Palestinians in Gaza intensifies, the Israeli PR machine continues to work with its allies around the world to both suppress the truth as well as intimidate and suffocate those who challenge its lies. In this case, let's talk about India. The Indian government has made it clear from the get-go that it is fully behind the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. Not only was New Delhi among the first to condemn Hamas for October the 7th, it has refused to get behind a global call for a ceasefire while feigning concern for Palestinian life. Instead, Narendra Modi's endorsement of Israel's devastating bombing campaign in Gaza has activated an entire ecosystem of disinformation, hate, and intimidation, both online and off, forcing most Indians to maintain a distance from publicly calling out Israel. And much of this has revolved around three tactics. First, suppressing all public support for Palestine. Now, to be clear, the Indian government has not explicitly banned protests, but activists in India say that it has done just enough to make it clear that actions calling for a ceasefire or even raising concerns about the absurd levels of violence being inflicted on Palestinians in Gaza was unwelcome. Those who have tried to hold rallies in the capital, New Delhi, were assaulted by police, placed on buses, and dumped outside the city. Others who have dared to protest were booked by authorities for disturbing communal harmony. Now, in Mumbai, the commercial center, around a dozen Muslims were arrested for simply taking part in a vigil that commemorated the fallen in Gaza. Then there have been refusals by the police to grant permits to stage protests in Calcutta, Bengaluru, as well as New Delhi. So again, not banned, but Indian democracy doesn't allow it either. But note that in places like Indian-occupied Kashmir, also known as the world's most militarized zone, where Kashmiris have long demonstrated support for Palestinians and where India is now replicating Israeli tactics in the region, protests have been explicitly banned. The levels of suppression has reached such heights that imams in different parts of the country, including occupied Kashmir, aren't allowed to raise Palestine in mosques. Now, like other authoritarian regimes, the Indian government knows that allowing protests for Palestine could energize larger dissatisfaction and dissent against Modi's rule. In fact, the only place that has managed to hold large rallies has been the state of Kerala, owing to the state's history and it being run by a coalition of opposition parties. The second tactic the Indian government has exercised has been an attempt to control the narrative and police free speech, especially at universities. Of course, universities are critical during times like these, and authorities have implemented a massive crackdown on all activities related to Palestine. Not only have public lectures been cancelled, but in cases where events like film screenings about the Israeli occupation have gone ahead, organizers have been subsequently smeared as terror sympathizers. And here, Israeli diplomats have personally interfered with free speech at universities. Following the lecture at one university by an esteemed Indian intellectual, Achin Vinayak, the Israeli ambassador to Delhi wrote to the vice-chancellor to complain and ask for an apology for hosting the lecture. As a result, Vinayak's next lecture at a different university was cancelled. The Israeli ambassador has also attacked the Indian magazine Frontline for its reportage on Gaza. Several hundred Indian scholars have since written a letter calling for an end to Israeli interference in Indian academia. Now finally, the third tactic, Islamophobia. Indian authorities have been using the Israeli war on the Palestinians as a way to energize hate against Muslims around the country. Now let me explain. Hindu nationalists have long claimed that India is fighting the same war against so-called Islamic fundamentalists. So when Hamas fighters launched their attack on October 7th, Hindu nationalists described the war against the Palestinians as their war too. Now this explains why hundreds of Indians asked to be signed up to fight for Israel. It explains why the mainstream media and the establishment have not pushed its government to call for a ceasefire. It also helps explain why India, the world's biggest buyer of Israeli weapons, remains fully committed to Israel's horrific campaign in Gaza. Now again, Hindu nationalists, and mind you, many Indian liberals too, admire Israel, and they look upon Zionism as a model to replicate, be it in containing Kashmiri self-determination or subjugating Indian Muslims, Dalits, Sikhs, or Christians. And with this war, they see the annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza as taking them one step closer to achieving their own objectives back home.